crush your enemies.
They drew first blood, not me.
See them driven before you.
Oh, my user.
And hear the lamentation of your women.
But I pity the fool.
Glitter in the dark near the 10 Hauser gate.
Phone home.
They're here.
Oh, real light sleeper, child.
Welcome to Vintage Video, where we're rewatching the 80s so you don't have to. We'll be reviewing every major film release of the 1980s in chronological order, overanalyzing what you've seen and spoiling what you haven't. I'm Patrick O'Reilly.
I'm Jesse Bayless.
And I'm Richard Wells.
And today we're discussing Missing, released March 12th, 1982. It was written by Costa-Gavras and Donald E. Stewart, based on the novel of the same name by Thomas Hauser, with uncredited work from John Nichols, directed by Costa-Gavras and released by Universal Pictures. Thora Birch was one day old the day this film was released. Happy birthday, Thora. In 1970, Salvador Allende of Chile became the world's first democratically elected socialist leader. In keeping with the tenets of socialism, Allende made public his intentions to nationalize major industries. Unfortunately, Chile's Congress was under right-wing control, and they were dragging their feet certifying the election. Their constitution at the time dictated that in the absence of a majority winner of the popular vote, Congress would approve whichever candidate had the most votes. Instead, they began negotiations with the second and third place candidates to stage a coup. President Nixon and the CIA had already been keeping a close watch on Allende for years and spent nearly $5 million on anti-Allende propaganda and propping up his political opponents due to a vested interest in stopping the spread of communism during the United States Cold War with the Soviet Union. Chile's Congress ordered General René Schneider, commander-in-chief of the Chilean army, to forcibly halt Allende's inauguration, but as a constitutionalist, Schneider refused to undermine the will of the Chilean people. It was at this point that the CIA stepped in on orders from Nixon to persuade Schneider to reconsider via a series of kidnapping attempts.
Oh my God.
After two failed attempts, Schneider's car was ambushed in an intersection in the nation's capital of Santiago, and when he drew a gun to defend himself, the windows of the car were broken in with something like a sledgehammer, and he was shot 3 times, passing away 3 days later in a military hospital. Even non-supporters of Allende among the public were outraged by the assassination, and Chile's military was hardened against congressional influence, rallying behind Allende and ensuring his election was swiftly ratified. So swiftly, in fact, that the election was certified between General Schneider's assassination and his death.
Huh.
Evidence of the CIA's direct involvement in the kidnapping-turned-killing was not officially declassified until last year.
Oh, really? So wait, but all of this information was in this movie already. Like, people knew.
They suspected it very strongly,
They just didn't have official files on it.
It was an open secret that hadn't been confirmed by the governments responsible yet.
Yeah, jeez.
Nixon approved a plan authored by Henry Kissinger at an expense of $10 million to prevent Allende's ascendance in the region. Nevertheless, he was sworn in November 3rd, 1970. His first year in office was wildly successful. The economy grew, inflation and unemployment rates dropped, radical tax changes facilitated a redistribution of wealth that resulted in increased salaries and reduced taxes. His national milk plan benefited fully half of the country's child population with a daily guarantee of a half liter of milk at no cost. But the transition was not without problems. By 1973, some of the consequences of Allende's economic policy were making themselves apparent. Chile's government deficit inflated wildly out of control, and shortages of necessary goods gave rise to nationwide black markets. Other problems beyond Allende's control involved global fluctuations in the price of copper, a prime export of the Chilean economy, and American aid to the country was predictably slashed. Businesses across the country engaged in a long string of labor strikes, crippling the economy and drawing the public support of President Nixon. Less publicly, Nixon and the CIA had funded the striking efforts directly with a $2 million payment. CIA operatives also assured senior Chilean military officers that the U.S. would support a coup, and conversely, that the absence of a coup would be punished by revoking all military aid to the country. Not willing to wait out this experiment until the next election, Allende's political opponents convened in secret to begin the planning stages of another coup attempt. This time intending to install General Augusto Pinochet, the current at the time commander-in-chief of the Chilean army, having indirectly succeeded General Schneider after his accidental assassination courtesy of American taxpayers by way of the CIA. They chose the date of September 11th as a specific reference to an earlier coup on September 11th of 1924, removing President Arturo Alessandri from power and establishing the Government Junta of Chile, a structure which collapsed to another coup the following January, restoring Alessandri to power. At 6 a.m. on the morning of the coup, the Army, Navy, and Air Force of Chile went incommunicado with President Allende. All radio and television networks were shut down, and those that continued broadcasting were silenced via airstrikes.
Oh my God.
Allende's cars and phone were disabled, and he holed up with his bodyguards in the presidential palace. By 9 a.m., the full force of the Chilean military was advancing on the palace and threatening to bomb the building if Allende did not resign his position. But he still refused. 90 minutes later, Allende gave a farewell speech informing his people of the coup and his refusal to resign under threat. By 2:30 that afternoon, the palace was under siege from army raids and strategic Air Force bombings, and President Salvador Allende was dead. Despite initial reports describing his death in battle against the invading troops, the cause of death was later revised to suicide. While the historical account is widely disputed, Allende had announced in the midst of the coup that he would not be taken alive, and the cause of death was later confirmed by third-party scientific autopsy performed by ballistic and forensics experts. While the CIA undoubtedly approved of Allende's removal from power and expended considerable effort destabilizing the Allende government, the official record maintains that the CIA did not directly contribute to the military coup of September 11, 1973. Charles Horman was an American investigative journalist who, in December of 1971, left New York with his wife Joyce, renamed Beth in the film, and by spring of '72 they'd arrived in Santiago, Chile, where Charles spent the next 18 months working as a freelance writer. But in September of '73, the nation was thrown into widespread disarray overnight by the violent overthrow of Allende's leadership. In the chaos that followed, Charles Horman vanished one night, leaving behind his wife Joyce and visiting Father Edmund Horman to follow the sparse clues and solve the mystery of his disappearance. In 1978, Horman's story was told in Thomas Hauser's novel entitled, spoiler alert, The Execution of Charles Horman, An American Sacrifice, though a reprint that coincided with the release of the film adaptation retitled the book to match as simply Missing. The film adaptation was set for distribution with Warner Brothers, but while producer Edward Lewis struggled assembling the right filmmaking team, Warner Brothers silently dropped the project, which soon found a new home at Universal, which threw its full support behind it. The studio encouraged writer-director Costa-Gavras not to hold back and invited him to name Chile with an opening title card, but in the eventual DVD commentary track, Costa-Gavras explains his choice never to mention the country specifically. He didn't want people to see this movie and think it's a thing that happened once in a specific place, because it happens all the time, all over the world. Though references in the film of specific Chilean cities like Santiago and Viña del Mar don't leave much room for confusion. The casting of Jack Lemmon was provisional after Walter Matthau suffered a back injury during the production of Buddy Buddy, and the film suffered multiple delays. When production began in Mexico, playing the part of Chile, they started with the scenes that didn't involve Lemmon's character in case he was forced to withdraw from the project, but the strategy paid off. On a budget of just under $9 million, the star power combo of Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek carried the film to a box office win of $16 million and critical praise. In official competition at the 1982 Cannes Film Festival, it took the top prize, the Palme d'Or, and Jack Lemmon won Best Actor.
This took the top prize?
As well made as the film is, I can't help but suspect that its victory was more a reward for depicting the American government in such a harsh light.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Which the French love to see. I interned at the festival in 2004, where the top prize went to Fahrenheit 9/11 for largely the same reason. If it were up to me, Fahrenheit didn't crack the top 3 over The Consequences of Love, Old Boy, and The Educators in that order. While the MPAA initially assigned the film an R rating, an appeal brought it down to PG without removing any content.
This PG?
PG?
There's so many bodies.
That was the next thing below R at the time.
Oh, I guess. Oh.
The film's release sparked a political firestorm, and the White House was quickly pressed for comment on its accusations. Reagan's Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, denounced the film and issued vehement denials of the film's allegations.
But the book had been published
right.
already, so...
Yeah, but
people don't see
read.
books. This is America we're talking about. Films introduce the American audience to stories. Similar to the Cannes win, the vocal disapproval of the Reagan administration helped to spur on box office and sway the Academy voters, landing the film 4 nominations for Picture, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay, winning only for Screenplay. It was the only film that year with nominations in both the Best Actor and Best Actress categories, and the only Best Picture nominee with no directing nomination. A year later, in the midst of its home video release, a lawsuit was filed by former ambassador Nathaniel Davis against author Hauser, director Costa-Gavras, and distributor Universal, alleging libel. The case against Hauser was dropped immediately since the charges were well beyond the statute of limitations, but the book and Missing's home video release were both pulled from stores during litigation. Universal won the case when the judge decided that while the film implies that the American government acted maliciously in covering up or potentially approving Horman's disappearance, it never outright accuses them of anything.
Yeah.
They never admit that they did these things. The film was predictably banned by Pinochet's installed dictatorship from its release through the end of his presidency in 1990, when he was replaced by Patricio Aylwin after Chile's return to democracy. What a prophetic name, though. Aylwin. The guy's name was Patricio Aylwin. Aylwin. Pinochet was actively being prosecuted for his many crimes in 2006, but died of natural causes during his trial, unconvicted, to the outrageous disappointment of Ed and Joyce Horman, and presumably many others. In 1983, a film neared release with the title Still Missing, which was adjusted last minute to Without a Trace to avoid being confused as a sequel to this film. We fade in on John Shea as Charles Horman, sitting in the backseat of a car watching kids play soccer in the dirt off the road. A truckload of armed soldiers roll through the middle of their game and ask Captain Tower, the man driving, for his ID. After confirming his credentials, they wave him through a checkpoint. Charles in the back seat and his friend Terry, played by Melanie Mayron, in the passenger seat, are both made anxious by the interaction. The voice of Jack Lemmon, who will appear later as Charles's father Ed Horman, reads the film's opening crawl.
This film is based on a true story. The incidents and facts are documented. Some of the names have been changed to protect the innocent and also to protect the film.
And for the most part, it's extremely close to the book and all available testimony of what actually happened. Captain Tower asks where they live since it's almost curfew, and Charles asks to be dropped off at the Hotel Cabrera. People outside the hotel talk about how they've been punished with firing squads for violating curfew. Charles and Terry don't have much time to get home from the hotel, but didn't want Captain Tower to have their address. Of course, Charles can't persuade a taxi to take them anywhere because the drivers too must be home soon. A siren signifying curfew sounds, and Charles and Terry move into the hotel. From their hotel room that night, Charles watches an upper-class gala at a venue across the street. We can hear Chuck Berry's rendition of the 1972 novelty song My Ding-a-ling emanating from the party. Very weird choice for this moment. I'm assuming it was just the song that played that night and it was in his notes, so they were like, why not? But yeah, still weird.
The Simpsons, like, with the kids singing it on the stage, and Skinner just comes in, this act is over.
My ding-a-ling, my ding-a-ling, I want you to play with my ding-a-ling.
This act is over.
The partygoers gather on the outdoor balconies and seem to applaud the passing military trucks crowded with soldiers. Charles worries about his wife Beth and how worried she must be that they didn't make it home tonight. He writes in his diary at a desk in the corner for a while, and Terry worries that it's unwise to document so much of his life on paper as he keeps with him.
Terry says it's unwise for me to document.
Exactly.
And then I wrote that I was unwise for me to document.
On the page, he scribbles her worries into his latest entry, 3:10 a.m. Terry just asked if it's smart to take all these notes. The next morning, Charles hops out of an early morning cab to reunite with Beth. Terry assures him she's still sleeping. He finds her passed out on the couch, played by Sissy Spacek. He wakes her gently.
The couch is played by Sissy Spacek.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Cast by J.D. Vance. You're going to play the couch in this scene, all right?
This is the casting couch? No, you are
No.
cast.
You are the cast and couch. He wakes her gently, and she's relieved to see him alive. He explains about being trapped after curfew last night. Beth talks about the military noise she heard outside the house. Charles tries to fix breakfast for the three of them, but a duck in the kitchen seems to be pecking into the bowl while he mixes ingredients. Why is there a duck in here? I guess it doesn't matter. Charles talks about ingredients they're out of, and Beth confesses she was too scared to shop. They joke around a bit more, but both are startled by loud gunfire outside. Seems close. Beth buries her face in Charles's chest and begs him to leave with her now that things have gotten so bad here. Charles seems to agree, with caveats. He thinks they have an obligation to sort things before they can leave. But Beth makes the case for leaving right this second.
So this is like Terry's with them right now, right?
Right.
There was a really odd, I couldn't tell what was happening because it looked like while they're looking at the gunfire, it looks like somebody comes up to their door and is standing outside their door, but it's just a really harsh shadow that's on
weird.
Terry and going to the door. But the way it looks like someone came up to their door.
That's strange.
And I was like, okay, what's happening? And then it's like, what?
That's not a person.
Well, I thought maybe it was like a goof, like a state, like crew or something.
Or some like Peter Pan's shadow just showed up preceding him. Charles has been in Never Never Land this whole time.
I feel like I didn't understand. I still don't quite understand based on now what you're telling me in terms of like the real story of all of this.
Yeah. This is all post removal. So the Allende is gone and Pinochet has already been installed. And this is what happened in the immediate aftermath of that.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. But in this moment where she's like, hey, we should probably just go.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, we can't. I'm assuming like he's part of like some big underground movement to like fix what's going on here.
I don't think he's saying, no, we can't. I think he's saying we have obligations to some people here and we'll settle those and then we'll go. But there are things that I'm not comfortable leaving without doing. Because
I feel like he's so secretive and then writing all this stuff down.
Yeah.
Like this movie implies that he's like
part a lot of his friends thought that too. So
yeah.
What's happening right now and Charles's attitude is also after all the things he's already witnessed that we'll see in flashbacks. So he's already kind of traumatized about what's happening.
Sure.
But is partially, I think, is keeping that from her. Like maybe not having her panic by knowing that it's actually worse than it actually is. But I also feel like he has another sense that I need to stay as long as I can to get this story out.
Yeah, because he is an investigative journalist, and this is a historical moment to be capturing. But you also want to survive it. It's really hard to report on things as a corpse. Charles asks if they've heard anything recently from their friends David and Frank, but Beth hasn't, and they both hope they're okay. Charles volunteers to check on them before they leave, but Beth says she'll go see Dave and Frank, while Charles runs Terry to the airport. They split up outside, and while Charles and Terry wait at the bus stop, soldiers drag random people away one at a time to charge them with various evolving infractions. The soldier grabs a woman near them, but Charles and Terry make it onto the bus unmolested.
What did he say?
He said from now on, women in this country wear dresses.
They get to a historically empty city square, now crowded with MPs, and Charles stupidly abandons Terry for a moment to buy today's paper. The man is sold out, and when Charlie gets back 15 seconds later, Terry's already being escorted away to a facility for processing. Charles wanders past bodies in the street to follow her into the building. They question her in Spanish, and Charles wanders in to translate for her. Turns out the airport is closed, so they aren't going anywhere today. They are, luckily, allowed to collect their possessions and walk out, and after a couple stops, they land at a nearby hotel. They ask the man behind the counter who they can talk to about coordinating a flight to America.
Well, that's not our job. You'll have to talk to somebody at the consulate.
Well, we were told that the consulate was closed because of gunfire and that the consul was working here.
Yeah? Well, that's news to me.
The man is stonewalling them, but a woman behind them perks up her ears to listen in on the conversation. She approaches to introduce herself as freelance reporter Kate Newman, and Charles is hesitant to engage with her. She suggests they continue hounding the man here because the consulate is far away in a dangerous area. He asks if he can read her paper, and we cut to the three of them seated in a dining room. When an older customer at another table is aggressively dragged outside over his wife's protestations, Charlie tries foolishly to intervene and is shoved back hard by two armed men.
Are you okay?
I'm all right.
For God's sake, why did you do that?
I don't know. I don't know.
Newman's advice is to find a hotel with a vacancy and just wait out this whole situation indoors. We see him dropping Terry at a hotel to rent them a room, and then he leaves to collect Beth to bring her here too. We cut to a pregnant woman named Maria crying in a chair, while Beth and another friend feel the kicks of a baby through her belly. She's apparently distraught at the recent disappearance of the baby's father, Carlos, but Beth assures her he will turn up. Beth moves to a balcony area and finds her friends Dave and Frank panicking about the state of their unnamed country. For a country that enforces curfews with firing squads, Beth is weirdly lax about catching her bus, and after she misses it, she tries desperately to flag down other rides home and winds up stranded on the street. As the last few public stragglers get more and more desperate, she starts to cross paths with bloody corpses in the street. Military jeeps race down the block firing warning shots in the air, and Beth ducks into a dress shop storefront. The proprietor spots her approaching the doors and shoos her away.
El toque de queda, por favor. Necesita ayuda.
Get out! No foreigners here.
Help me.
Get out!
Eventually, she comes to a major intersection where soldiers are burning books. A heavy-set man is trapped out here on the street with her, and he races back and forth to avoid soldiers, fully out of breath. Beth hides behind a fence in a small alcove and wakes hours later to the sound of crackling gunfire. She looks up at the street as a white horse races down the middle of the road, and soon after, another military jeep firing their weapons continuously to scare the animal. Beth passes out again, and the next morning church bells ring to signal an all clear. Beth rushes home and calls nonchalantly to Charlie from outside the door, but inside, the place has been fully ransacked. A man walks in to report that soldiers flooded the apartment last night, and she should probably leave in case they come back. We cut now to Charlie's father, Ed Horman, played by Jack Lemmon, sitting across a desk from a U.S. senator in search of his son.
Have you been to the State Department?
I have tried, sir. Many different people. You are the first person that would see me.
The senator points him to the State Department, and we cut right there to learn they can't locate Charlie either. Ed is confused because the papers are reporting that Charlie was arrested.
Well, that's what your daughter-in-law told the press. She's been pestering those embassy people, so they told me.
Ed cites another friend in the region whose account corroborates Beth, but another State Department representative assures him that all Americans arrested during the coup have been released, including Teruggi and Holloway, the surnames of Frank and Dave that Charlie was talking about.
And Teruggi left without even thanking the embassy.
He didn't even thank us for jailing him temporarily. Ed is led back to the congressman's office for another meeting and mentions offhand that he's a Christian Scientist, meaning an adherent to the Church of Christ Scientist, founded in the late 1800s by Mary Baker Eddy, whose book Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, together with the Bible, is the central text of the Christian Scientist theology, which is generally similar to run-of-the-mill Christianity, but predates Scientology in condemning modern medicine, except in emergency situations, and discourages some vaccines, believing all illnesses to be psychosomatic. If this were a fictional story, I might even call it an on-the-nose decision, since we'll learn that Ed spends the first act of the movie assuming everyone's problems are simply imaginary. But the real Edmund Horman was a Christian Scientist, and so was his son Charlie. Ed's second encounter with the congressman is a walk-and-talk situation, and it's here that one of the senator's aides shares a popular theory that Charlie was never arrested and is simply in hiding waiting out the coup. The congressman asks about Charlie's politics, and Ed guesses liberal, but hesitates to characterize his son as a radical. The congressman half commits to sending along a cable to demand an investigation, but when they part ways, Ed looks disappointed, and we cut right to him landing in Chile, intending to track down Charlie himself. Passing through customs, the agents attempt to confiscate Ed's Bible and Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, but they are interrupted by the appearance of Phil Putnam, the U.S. Consul in Chile. He returns Ed's books and escorts him out of the airport. Putnam tries to fill him in on the local situation, but Ed is repeatedly distracted by military personnel aggressively dragging people into custody.
You think there was a war going on here?
Well, there is one, sort of.
Well, I thought the coup was over.
It is, but there's still problems. The ambassador can see you this afternoon at 3:30, if that's okay with you.
Yes, the sooner the better.
Good.
They hop in a car to take Ed to Hotel Cabrera, and Putnam mentions how happy he'll be to move on to his next assignment, hopefully in Brazil. Beth is waiting outside when the car pulls up, and she greets Ed warmly. She apologizes for not meeting him at the airport, but she's been trying to meet with a Major Pieto, and this morning was her only window. Putnam tells them he'll be back around 2:30 to escort them to the ambassador. When they're finally alone together in the hotel room, Ed is very short with Beth and answers her questions as grumpily and sarcastically as possible.
How's Elizabeth?
How do you suppose?
You blame me?
He doesn't answer. He mentions Putnam's thoughts on the country healing after the violent week, but Beth isn't convinced. She shares that every government representative she can reach just gives her the runaround, and Charlie's been gone 2 weeks now. Ed sneers and shakes his head, annoyed at the implication of her words. When she mentions the possibility that Charlie is out there getting tortured or worse, it's more than Ed can stomach, not because he shares her pessimism, but because he thinks her suspicions are entirely nonsense.
They don't give a goddamn about him.
Oh, look, really, I don't want to hear any of your anti-establishment paranoia. I certainly get enough of that from my son.
When Beth starts crying, Ed angrily tells her to stop, and then seeing he's gone a step too far, promises to find Charlie. He gifts her a bag of reportedly difficult-to-locate products, but Beth admits the market is recovering and stores are better stocked now. Ed asks where Terry is, and Beth says she's getting a plane ticket and leaves tomorrow. Beth leaves for her own room to change clothes for the ambassador meeting, and when she gets back, Ed races to put his foot back in his mouth.
Beth, before we get started, I have to ask you a question. I want you to answer me absolutely honestly.
Okay.
What did he do?
What?
What stupid thing did Charles do to cause his arrest or make him go into hiding?
Beth is flabbergasted by Ed's ignorance of the situation here and insists that Charlie is too smart to have deserved whatever happened to him. But Ed seems settled on the theory that this is all a prank by Charlie to sell his next book. Beth tells Ed to leave and she can find her husband alone. At the ambassador's residence, Ed and Beth sit down with the ambassador, Navy Captain Tower, and Colonel Clay, their defense attaché. Together, they try again to suggest that Charlie is simply in hiding, but Beth won't have it. She mentions the corroboration of their entire neighborhood that Charlie was rounded up by the new government's goon squads, but Putnam steps in to list everywhere he has been checking in the last week in search of Charlie. He confirms that Charlie is not currently in the custody of the new government. When the colonel suggests Charlie might not have reached out because he's injured, Ed optimistically grabs at straws, suggesting a coma or amnesia is keeping his son away. Two extremely unlikely scenarios that he lends more credence to than the testimony of his own daughter-in-law. Gunshots outside startle Ed, who seems surprised to hear violence even from inside the ambassador's home. As the officials take turns pretending to be helpful, Beth is consistently antagonistic to their remarks, and every comment from her inspires an eye roll from Ed. The Navy man, Captain Tower, asks Beth if she ever prepared the list he requested.
What list?
I asked her for a list of Charles' friends so I could extend this investigation.
I'll see that you get it.
Even a child would have no trouble translating the actual practical use of such a list, but Ed still believes everything the government tells him. Beth says that many of their friends were already contacted by the consulate and called to offer testimony. The ambassador and Putnam together deny any knowledge of these calls, and Beth calls bullshit.
What telephone calls?
I wasn't aware of any.
You certainly were. I saw all the notes on the calls the day Shepler showed me your file cards.
I forgot that, sir. You're right.
And even now, after she's caught him in a blatant lie, oh, those calls, Ed will still defer to Putnam's advice and accuse Beth of paranoia. The ambassador suggests they touch base again in a few days. As soon as Beth and Ed are left on the porch for their ride home, Ed demands an explanation for her behavior, and she reminds him she's been dealing with these same people for 2 weeks and gotten nowhere. Now we do a weird thing. We hard cut to Charlie, filmed through a foggy lens. The Vangelis score turns unsettling as we see Charlie on a beach posing for a photo taken by Terry. At first glance, it seems like we're revealing a twist, that Charlie and Terry together have in fact staged his disappearance.
Yeah, it was such a hard cut to this them on the beach. It's like, wait, what?
If that wasn't the point of doing it this way, then I feel like this was a huge mistake to not just show someone telling a story first.
Yeah.
We don't get a title card to update the chronology, but the Vaseline filter seems to imply a flashback. Terry urges Charlie further and further back in his posing until he falls off a ledge.
One more step.
Charlie has hopped harmlessly off a small sand cliff to the beach below.
It's an old joke.
My next guess was that this was a dream that Ed was having at the hotel, picturing his son gallivanting on a beach with a beautiful woman while the folks back home are worried sick.
Yeah, because it very much sets it up like it looks like they were having an affair.
Right. They head to a bus station to buy tickets home, but the trucker strike is impacting all travel and there's no train till the morning. So instead, they book a local hotel together. Sometime later, the sound of frighteningly close military helicopters rouses Charlie from his hotel bed. He runs to the balcony and walks dangerously close to a helicopter with a gunner as it floats maybe 20 feet in front of him. And for a lot of this time, the gun is pointed right at him.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem spooked at all to stand down from the barrel of the chopper gun, and down on the street he sees military jeeps approaching the presidential palace and tanks staged to block the roads. Presumably this is the morning of September 11th, 1973, when Allende was officially deposed. The film had Mexican army tanks lined up for this sequence, but at the last minute Mexico rescinded the offer, and the convincing doubles here are actually made out of wood. Do you guys recall the last time we saw military vehicles from overhead that turned out to be fakes made of wood?
I do, but I don't remember what the movie was. Richard remembers.
Eye of the Needle?
That's right.
That's right.
We flash back to the present and Beth, Ed, and Terry sharing a dinner. The scene we just witnessed was her account of the morning of the coup. Terry says they were basically stranded in the hotel where they met other Americans, and we get a weird moment that just feels like somebody missed their cue. Ed asks,
And they were caught up by the coup also?
which doesn't seem to be a sensitive subject or a misreading of her story, but Terry doesn't respond. She just turns to look at Beth and then looks back to Ed when Beth interrupts Ed's next question.
And then you met Babcock?
No. Him we met the next morning.
There's a quick little aside where Jack Lemmon keeps dipping his fingers into the sugar bowl and then licking it and then dipping his fingers back into it again. And I was like, what the heck? What is he
Very
doing?
Weird.
And she goes, did you learn that from Charlie? And he says, Charlie learned it from me. He's like, no one should be doing this.
Yeah. I learned it from watching you, Dad.
I learned it by watching you.
In the hotel's breakfast area, Charlie asks a man in Spanish if he can borrow his newspaper, and the man responds in English with a French accent that Charlie can stick to his native tongue. And when Charlie next mistakes the man as French, Babcock laughs heartily and admits he's actually American.
I come from Paris, Texas, boy.
You're American.
Yeah, red, white, and blue.
Well, you fooled me.
Good.
I like that the man says red, white, and blue as if to prove he's American by identifying the colors of the flag, which also happens to be the colors of the Chilean and French flags. In conversation, Babcock explains sort of under his breath that he is retired military, sent here for a special mission that has now been carried out.
Well, the Navy sent me down here to do a job, and she's done.
He says he's stationed in Panama.
What's it like in Panama?
Well, Panama's nice.
Is it?
And it's a good place to keep an eye on everything.
The obvious implication being that this guy is basically Christopher Walken from The Dogs of War, and he gets called up when it's time to replace a world leader covertly, and then he goes back to his hidey hole in Panama. In the back,
with his gun in the refrigerator.
Exactly, yeah. In the background, we see Jerry Hardin dressed in full military regalia, and Babcock has to go. This is clearly his handler and liaison to keep the mercenary actions off the official books. They head upstairs together, and Charlie is blown away at how much the man shared. I guess assuming that any American is safe to speak openly around, never guessing Charlie might be a left-leaning investigative journalist. We get one of those scenes where a character says words and we hear the person telling the story paraphrasing them and then transition back to the restaurant in the present. Charlie decided to keep a record of all the information this man shared with him, and Beth connects the dots for Ed that this man was aiding America in coordinating the coup. Of course, Ed thinks this is crazy talk because the government clearly said they weren't involved, and the government has never, ever lied. Beth and Terry talk a bit about Captain Tower and his many meetings with Admiral Huidobro. He promised to put them in touch with the Admiral, but he kept no-showing. The dinner, as always, is peppered with distant gunfire, and eventually it overpowers the scene, and wider, we realize this restaurant is actually on a rooftop patio, and a helicopter hovering nearby fires down with a spotlight trained on the street below. All of the customers crowd the railings around the rooftop for a view of the violence, but Ed is still begging for more details of the aborted Huidobro meeting. It seems from the story like the Admiral was never even invited to the meeting because it was scheduled right up against curfew, and when Beth and Terry found themselves stranded there, Captain Tower invited them to spend the night. How convenient. That evening, as Beth was taking a bath, Tower walks right in on her. She covers herself with a towel, and he advises her to forget about Charlie and move on. He repeatedly corners her in the building over the course of the night, and she knocks desperately on the door to the room she's sharing with Terry to escape him.
You know what I mean?
Hey, leave me alone. Terry, it's me.
Clearly, he's been pestering them both, and Beth barely gets inside before Tower reaches their door. Weirdly, they both laugh once they get inside, instead of crying at this terrifying situation. After the story, Ed seems mad, but not for the right reasons. He asks Terry if she can deliver a letter to his wife Elizabeth when she leaves, and she agrees, so he calls it a night. Ed reappears in the doorway to ask, in an accusatory tone, why Beth would take a bath at Tower's home, because obviously she was asking for it.
Dad, I took a bath. We were stuck there.
When he walks away silently, she follows him toward the lobby.
Wait a minute. Where are you going?
Can't you lower your voice for a walk?
You can't go out for a walk. It's curfew. You'll get shot.
Did she have an affair with Charles?
Why did you come here?
I kind of wish she'd said, you know what? Never mind. Enjoy your walk. The next day, Beth speaks with witnesses from their neighborhood who saw Charles being taken away. We see their testimonies illustrated in live action. At first, there's a crowd of soldiers leading him to a pickup truck painted in fatigues. The next witness pipes up to correct that it was a civilian truck, and the one in the shot loses the fatigue paint job, and now it's just a blue and white Dodge truck.
But in all scenarios, they kick the crap out of a duck, and it really pisses me off.
The same duck. It's the one from the kitchen.
They just keep kicking him straight up into the air.
But this time there are fewer soldiers leading Charlie away. The first witness insists it was an army truck, and we see it change back just before it drives away. Unfortunately, right as it starts up, we can see the duck from the apartment is now standing under the truck, and it flies desperately ahead of the wheels to escape before the picture cuts away. Beth walks Ed through the ravaged apartment they shared, and Ed pretends it always looked like this, and they were just gross privileged kids getting a thrill from poverty tourism. Beth assures him that they're here because they like it here, and it's the best home she's ever had. A small child knocks on the window asking after the missing duck, but Beth tells him that it left. They both hope it will come back when Charlie does. Ed finds a copy of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's novella The Little Prince and exudes disgust that any adult would be caught dead owning a copy of a story for children. Beth tries to win him over by summarizing the story, but the whole time he stares at her like she's an alien and he can't fathom someone caring about a children's story.
Man, I got a lot of children's books.
Yeah.
Because I don't read good.
Yeah. Do you guys recall the last time we brought up The Little Prince on the show?
I do remember us talking about it.
Someone described it as a fascist work in that film.
Oh, no.
He said a lot of crazy stuff. The guy who called it a fascist work.
Was it the David Bowie film?
No. There's only 2 characters in this movie.
Oh, was it My Dinner with Andre?
That's right. Next, he stumbles upon a draft of a children's book Charlie was working on.
Once upon a time, there was a country so far north, it was further north than the North Pole.
The story centers on a character called the Sunshine Grabber, and Beth unfurls a drawing of the protagonist, a sort of half bunny, half duck with human eyes cut out of a black and white photo of Beth.
Recognize the eyes?
He seemed so innocent, almost deliberately naive.
Is that so bad?
Is that so good?
There's a knock at the door, and it's a woman from across the street. They've been expecting her, and she has a taxi waiting for them. She leads them along the path she drove the day of Charlie's disappearance. She saw them load him into a military truck as she was passing the house, and they pulled onto the street ahead of her taxi.
My taxi followed the same road the truck took. Then they drove right into that big door and went inside the stadium.
How come you followed them?
She didn't. She was just
Let
on
her
her
answer, please. Why did your taxi take the same route as the truck?
Well, I just live beyond the stadium. And I have to go past here when I come from the house of my mother.
Already, Ed has decided the story is fabricated because Putnam told Charlie he was never in the stadium, and the U.S. Consul, who has already been caught in several provable lies, could not possibly have lied to him again. Suddenly, a car full of Chilean officials pulls up beside them, and I'm not clear what even happens here. We hear a clunk sound, and then somehow Ed is offended.
I don't believe that.
He rolls down his window to argue with the men for whatever just happened, and Beth begs him to stop.
Ed, don't.
Would you? What?
Don't. They could arrest her just for talking to us.
The men in the other car gesture for them to move on down the road, and the woman helping them hides her face in her hands. Back at the hotel, the same reporter woman, Kate Newman, approaches them with knowledge of Charlie's case. She asks if he's frustrated with what little progress the embassy has made in their investigation, but Putnam appears, and Ed tells her he's not interested in whatever drama she's trying to stir up. She grabs Beth by the shoulder as Ed walks away.
Get him to talk to me, will you?
Okay.
Okay.
Putnam leads them to the same Captain Tower and Army Colonel combo to pester Beth for more personal info, implying to Ed that it's her reticence to cooperate that is dooming Charlie's chances of being found. It works surprisingly well. The Colonel pipes in with a new theory that he probably just pulled out of his ass, suggesting that Charlie's disappearance is a black flag operation.
There's another theory kicking around.
What is that?
That your son was picked up by leftists, posing as soldiers.
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, there are even people who think it may have been his idea.
A lot of people are saying these things. Ed is clearly buying all of it.
You've got to be kidding me.
I mean, he could have done it to embarrass the government, to make it look like they're arresting Americans.
They are arresting Americans.
Horman,
Or don't David
Horman,
Holloway
excuse
and Frank Teruggi count?
Mrs. Horman, of course they count.
She points to the example of her friends Dave and Frank and mentions to Ed that they'll speak to Dave tomorrow.
Also, who would he have been doing at the benefit of the 2 old people across the street who couldn't get the story right.
Yeah, we just wanted it to look to these two anonymous neighbors who spoke to no one but you that Americans are being arrested. Putnam and friends do their best to quiet her outbursts, and Ed hands them a piece of paper with his findings thus far for them to follow up on. On my first pass, I was worried that Ed had composed a list of all of Beth and Charlie's friends because he was tired of waiting for her to do it,
Oh, God.
and they'd all get rounded up overnight. Before the group splits up, Ed broaches the subject of embassies having contacts within the local police.
And I don't care how it is run or who runs it. I just want you to use it to help find my son.
I assure you, Mr. Horman,
And that's all I have to say about it right now. Thank you.
They try half-assedly to deny any direct control over the police here, and he shuts them down to walk away. As they leave, Putnam asks Ed not to speak with the reporter woman from the hotel lobby, and Ed asks no questions. He's like, got it. Won't get any further information other than what you feed me. Yum, yum, yum. Can't wait. On the elevator later, Ed asks Beth why she still hasn't provided the friend list, and when she spells out exactly how they would use the list, he's still convinced of her paranoia. It sparks another argument between them that carries all the way back to their hotel room. Ed admits that Beth and Charlie seem like a bunch of children, spending their parents' money and going wherever they can avoid adult responsibilities. Ed slams his door to close out her screaming, and moments later she returns to the door to apologize, but he doesn't answer her apology. We cut to another likely flashback, judging from the light fogginess. We see David Holloway, one of the famously arrested Americans, sitting at a typewriter when suddenly a squad of soldiers push silently into his apartment and put a pistol against the back of his head. At first he thinks it's Frank poking him as a joke. He grabs the gun with his hand, but then he notices all the soldiers and stands quickly with his hands up. They ask where Frank is, and Dave leads them to the next room. He pleads with Frank to do what they say, but Frank is unexpectedly aggressive, and one of the soldiers socks him in the gut, knocking the wind out of him. They are driven together to the same stadium where Charlie was allegedly taken. Once inside, it becomes clear to them what a serious situation they are in. They watch the other prisoners beaten bloody and walked fully nude down long hallways to their presumed executions. We jump back to the present, and Ed tells the story to Beth, Ed, and reporter Newman. Back to the flashback, we see Frank reassuring Dave that as Americans they are essentially untouchable, and bets him a dinner that they'll be out in no time. A soldier calls Frank's name and leads him through a door, and on the way, Frank laughs, insisting he won the bet and they're about to be released. But it seems like deep down, we all know what's actually happening, including Dave and Frank. We cut back to Dave finishing the story.
It's the last time I ever saw Frank. They released me the next day.
That's a clever bet, though. Like, I bet you a dinner that they won't kill me, because if they do, I can't be held accountable. And if I don't, free dinner.
Were they a couple?
I think so.
Okay. I got the feeling that they were, but, you know, obviously, like, they don't flat out say it, but...
Makes me wonder what Dave thought was poking into the back of his head.
Jesus.
Cut it out, Frank. Ed unhelpfully presumes that despite his release, Frank is in hiding as a funny prank on his loved ones. When everyone mocks this theory, he can't fathom why they reject all hope of survival. I guess he just hasn't been here long enough. Ed is ready to blame Finn, the magazine they all write for their detainment, but Dave says it never came up in his interrogation. When they get back to their hotel room, they find a man working on the phone in Ed's room. He quickly finishes up and claims he fixed the receiver. Ed points out the phone was fine, and the guy claims it's even better now.
Yeah. Now, Ed, clearly, he even says, I can't believe that they're so bold about this.
Pretty obvious what the guy's doing here.
Now it's working better.
They fixed mine yesterday.
How can he be that brazen about it?
Hello, Ray Tower. How's every little thing over there in your electric game room?
The phone rings, and it's the ambassador inviting Ed to a meeting in the morning, and more likely just testing this phone, making sure they have a good connection. When he arrives with Beth in tow, Putnam tries to keep her out until the ambassador behind him says she's welcome too. Insanely, despite their many meetings over the course of the week, he seems to forget why they're even here.
What happened? Just have a seat, please.
Yes, what happened, sir?
Did you find him?
What? Oh, no, not that at all. I'm sorry.
What is it then? Really? You didn't know? You didn't know what he was talking about when he said, did you find him? Turns out they dragged him all the way out here just to issue a firmer denial of the government's involvement with local police.
I repeat, Mr. Horman, no such operation exists.
Ed reminds them he doesn't care. They tell Ed they've gotten him access to hospitals with unidentified dead. He asks about the stadium, and they're still working on clearance. Ed reminds them that he's just a father here to collect his son, alive, injured, or dead. He doesn't care about corruption. He doesn't care about the law. He just wants closure.
Because what is done is done. I just want you to reach those people and tell them I will take Charles back in any condition. I'm not going to make a stink. I'm not going to go to the newspapers. You make out any kind of a release form, I will sign it. I will absolve anyone, everyone of everything. I just want my boy back.
His words don't move their position an inch. They excuse him from the office without admitting to any knowledge of Charlie's fate or whereabouts. On their way out, Beth tells Ed how proud she is of him speaking truth to power. Putnam escorts them to the gate and asks who Ed Horman is that so many in Washington seem to be following this case so intently.
What kind of pull do you have up there, anyway?
An American citizen.
We cut to Ed reading a book in a Christian Science reading room, and a man from the consulate enters to tell him Beth is waiting in a car outside. It's pouring on them, and the driver from the consulate is taking them on a tour of the city's hospitals. The driver asks what Christian Science is, and Ed says it's about faith in truth. Beth notices a car following them in the rain and silently taps Ed's shoulder to point it out.
So the faith in truth line was ADR'd, and I watched it like 4 or 5 times. I can't make out what Jack Lemmon is actually saying.
Interesting, I didn't catch that. I'm depressed. I get pissed. They are toured through all the wings of the hospital, crowded with living and incapacitated patients. But before they check on any of the dead, a crowd of onlookers draw their attention to a corpse floating down the river outside the hospital. Ed needs a moment to collect himself, and they go on a short walk together despite warnings from officials that it's not safe here. They talk about Charlie, and Beth describes a visit they made together to Ed and Elizabeth in Cape Cod. They were forbidden at the time from sharing a room, so they snuck out to walk along the beach at night. Ed asks about Charlie's favorite things. Beth mentions singing in the shower, cooking corned beef hash with an egg in it, and that he had all the constellations memorized. Ed is predictably disturbed when Beth delves into their sex habits. In an office later, Beth and other friends screen for Ed a short film they made of all their friends having a picnic together. Charlie and Frank act out a bit where Charlie explains socialism to Frank as if he's never heard of it.
So you go, if you have 2 cards, the state takes 1 card, gives it to the man who has no card, and you get to keep 1 card. Se bueno, see? If you have 2 chickens, the state takes 1 chicken, gives it to the man who has no chicken, you get to keep 1 chicken. What's the matter, compañero? I thought you understood our revolution.
I have 2 chickens.
Ed doesn't even understand why they would film this gathering. One of Charlie's friends makes an effort to convince Ed that the government has misrepresented Charlie in describing him. They assure him that Charlie was far from radical in his politics, and if they hadn't gone into hiding, they could easily be in the same place.
Why did you go into hiding?
I knew they would pick me up.
Why? What had you done?
You Americans, you always assume you must do something before you can be arrested.
Well, isn't that the way it usually works?
Not here, Mr. Horman.
Another friend, Maria, pipes up to suggest that Charlie was so unpolitical in conversation that some even believed he was with the CIA, since he kept copious notes of every human interaction. Maria assures Beth that Charlie will come home just like her Carlos did, and this is where I realize this is the pregnant woman from earlier, who was worried her husband was killed. Ed meets with more officials that present certificates proving all American prisoners have been released. Ed asks about Frank Teruggi, the famously missing American prisoner, and they claim not to recognize the name. It's starting to sink in with Ed that any inconvenient truth is papered over with lies. We cut now to the National Stadium, and Ed is given a microphone to address the thousands seated here. He tells Charlie he wants to bring him home, and Beth speaks for a moment before someone rises in the crowd to approach them. Ed sees the man running toward them and assumes desperately that it's Charlie, but Beth insists it isn't. When the man reaches the fencing around the field, he openly mocks Ed's desperation.
My father cannot come here. But how about some ice cream with my dinner, Coronel Espinosa?
The reporter, Katie Newman, escorts Beth and Ed to the Italian embassy to speak with someone with inside information. The Italian embassy is currently housing around 800 refugees, and they're led to a man named Mr. Paris, who has some information on Charlie's imprisonment. It seems like this guy worked at the stadium or something.
He was a police or military person who had inside information, but I guess because
But he's been hiding out here because he's been giving the information out.
Yeah.
The information is secondhand from a friend, but Paris mentions a general, a colonel, and an American officer together in a room with his friend. The prisoner was in another room.
Was he alive?
More or less.
What do you mean, more or less?
I'm only telling you what I heard.
What the hell does more or less mean?
What I don't like about this is we get his flashback of a story of the secondhand information.
Right.
But it's featuring all the people that we've already seen that he wouldn't know.
Right, exactly.
And as like, I guess they have to do that because we're supposed to assume that this is Ed's mental flashback of what he's hearing.
Yeah, I guess.
But that's different from what we've seen before.
Right, that makes sense. The prisoner had been tortured, and Paris is short on details, but when asked to guess the man's name, he says Horseman, and then admits that it might very well have been Horman. After some prompting from Newman, the man shares a statement from the general in the room.
He said the man must disappear.
Oh my God, why?
He knew too much.
About what?
I don't know.
Paris claims Charlie was sent back to the National Stadium, which denies he was ever processed there.
How can you order the disappearance of an American?
I didn't order his disappearance.
Yeah, he didn't order his disappearance.
Paris agrees with Ed's suspicion that an American could not have been killed without the permission of the U.S. government.
How can I verify that?
You can't.
On the ride back to the hotel, Ed suggests consulting Charlie's notes for whatever knowledge might have gotten him killed. On the side of the road, two men spray paint graffiti on a wall, and a passing military jeep fires a machine gun in their direction. As the men run away, the jeep pulls up next to their cab and continues firing from right beside Ed's door. Ed holds his hands tightly over his ears to block the unbearable sound until he snaps. He throws open the car door to shout at the soldiers, and they level a machine gun in his face.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Horman! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Good God. What the hell were you trying to do? Get us all killed?
I'm sorry. I am just beginning to get awfully sick and tired of all of this shit!
I saw your son do almost the same damn dumb thing.
He did that?
Back at the hotel, they read Charlie's notes, and we get a repeat of the introduction to Babcock. We came down here to do a job, and well, she's done. This time we learn a little bit more. Babcock admits up front to Charlie that the coup was planned in advance with the American military. In another excerpt of Charlie's diary, he crossed paths with Babcock's military contact, the colonel, played by Jerry Hardin. The man mentions military bombings being carried out by the American forces.
The military is doing search and destroy missions, just like in Vietnam.
In a later encounter with Babcock, Terry mentions she's flying to Bolivia next, and Babcock says he's headed that way himself to deal with other governmental issues. Charlie mentions to Terry how Babcock's full story doesn't hold water.
Sherlock, tell me something. What would a naval engineer be doing in Bolivia?
One of two landlocked countries in Latin America.
Somehow, over the course of another short conversation with the colonel, they're able to talk their way into a safe house for Americans where they can wait out the rest of the coup.
We arrived at the home of Paul Baker, where naval mission radio was installed.
The next day, they host a going-away barbecue around a pool in the backyard, and the colonel continues to be very open with the Americans about operations in the region.
They want to talk to Babcock again this afternoon. I've made
Because we were Americans, they considered us automatic allies in anything the U.S. might do.
Hamburger to miss with a rocket.
Newman thinks having Charlie around may have caught someone's attention, and when they did a background check, they learned he was a journalist for a left-leaning publication and might be a problem. Back in the hospitals, there are so many unidentified corpses that the bodies are just piled up across every square inch of floor. And though they don't find Charlie among the bodies, Beth stumbles across a familiar face. Ed assumes from her choking gasp that Beth has found Charlie, but it's Frank. Hours later, Putnam is here, crowded with police, trying to get an answer for why Frank's body wasn't identified sooner. And also probably why these people were let into a room of actually unidentified bodies.
Yeah.
Because you should just send them into a room you know is 100% safe.
Right.
Yeah. And also obviously all the contradictions now. It's like, oh, he was released and made it back. He flew back, and we have confirmation of all this.
Beth and Ed try to comfort each other in a nearby waiting room.
What kind of world is this?
You sound just like Charlie.
When Putnam finally has a story together, he tells Ed that by insane coincidence, Frank happens to be the only unidentified body in that room that was dead when they found him, just killed randomly on the street.
Right.
Ed reminds him that he's already been guaranteed by officials that Frank left the country, and Putnam flounders for an explanation.
Most likely some screw up with local immigration.
Ed is wrapping up a phone call with Elizabeth that night when the hotel starts shaking, and he assumes it's an earthquake. I wouldn't, but he's right. Beth and Ed move together to the lobby, but guards at the front door warn people against going outside, even during this emergency, because the curfew supersedes it. A family, father, mother, and infant, ignore the warning and push through the revolving doors out onto the street. Gunshots ring out, and they immediately head back inside. It's like that Abe Simpson gif.
Yeah.
Just like immediately turn around, grab their hats again. I get the impression that they didn't speak the language that the warning was being given in, because otherwise why would you take the baby out there? Ed invites Beth to the lobby seating area for a drink to calm down. He finally gives Beth a speech it's clear he's been planning for days.
I owe you an apology.
No, you don't.
No. Well, for a long time now, I've sold you short. Both of you. I don't really know why, unless it's because I'm getting old. And I'm very stubborn.
He confesses overwhelming guilt, and Beth shares some of Charlie's wisdom that guilt is for survival and not self-destruction.
Beth, for what it's worth, I think you are one of the most courageous people I have ever met. I mean it.
Thank you.
Beth asks point blank if there's still hope for Charlie, and Ed claims to believe it's possible that he's still alive. To distract from these darker thoughts, he mentions their next steps. His wife Elizabeth has coordinated a meeting with someone named Peter Cook at an office called the Ford Foundation tomorrow, and Beth asks if she can skip that meeting because she needs a break from them, and Ed understands. When Ed gets to the Ford Foundation to speak with Mr. Cook, he learns the man is out of the country, but Ed is led to a conference room by another Foundation associate. He introduces himself as Peter Charnon, and he informs Ed quite bluntly that he has reliable intelligence that Charlie has been killed.
He thinks your son was executed in the National Stadium on September 19th.
For the first time since he got here, Ed is being told the truth, and he knows it.
That was nearly a month ago.
He wants to talk to Charnon's contact in person, but it's not an option.
I probably shouldn't even have told you.
After taking a moment to absorb it, Ed collects his things and leaves. He heads straight to the ambassador's office where they're trying to juice him up with more optimistic lies. Ed is introduced to a man named Samuel Cross, who tells him point blank that Charlie is alive.
And he'll be home soon.
Oh, he's gonna be great. You're gonna get a phone call any second now.
I almost wanted the phone to go, no.
No, sorry. This was just my 3 o'clock alarm. He claims that credentials were secured for 3 Americans to leave Santiago very recently, and one of them was Charlie Horman. Even though in the past Ed has been tempted to disregard bad news and accept the good, he's finally recognizing the pattern, and he's infuriated by Cross's lies. He demands the man be removed from the room so he can discuss his son's execution with the ambassador. They obviously didn't expect this reaction from him, since thus far he's believed everything they've said. Turns out people will only believe so many bald-faced lies in a row. Ed is past confirming his son's execution and wants to know who on the American side approved it. They pull the standard defensive position of, well, that's quite an accusation. They feign confusion over why an American's execution would ever be permitted.
Probably because he knew of our involvement in the coup.
We're not involved, Mr. Horman. Our position has been completely neutral.
The ambassador tries one last time to convince Ed he is mistaken, but Ed is furious.
Look, it's very obvious that you're harboring some misconception regarding our role here.
What is your role here? Besides endorsing a regime that murders thousands of human beings?
Let's level with each other, sir. If you hadn't been personally involved in this unfortunate incident, you'd be sitting at home, complacent, and more or less oblivious to all of this.
His point being that it's shady shit like this that makes America such a great country to live in. If you don't like hot dogs, don't wander through a hot dog factory. When Ed turns to leave, Captain Tower takes his last opportunity to take a dig at Charlie in particular.
I don't know what happened to your kid, Ed. But I understand he was a bit of a snoop. He poked his nose around in a lot of dangerous places where he really didn't belong.
Essentially confirming Ed's theory that Charlie knew too much and was killed for it by his own people. He compares Charlie's actions to fucking around with the New York Mafia. If Charlie wound up sleeping with the fishes, his family wouldn't find a sympathetic ear from the police since he started the trouble himself.
You play with fire, you get burned.
For the second time this morning, Ed has had his worldview flipped upside down, and he wanders lackadaisically out of the building again. Back at the hotel, he sees a pair of men escorting Beth out of the lobby. He stops them and asks to speak with Putnam at the consulate, who demands Beth and Ed appear together to give testimony about Charlie. Beth is interrogated, answering the same questions for the 100th time. Ed stands nearby during her questioning, but is called away to answer a phone. On my first watch, I was sure she would disappear when he left her alone for a second, but instead, we see Putnam on the phone confirming the Ford Foundation report that Charlie was killed on the 19th. They say he was identified by fingerprints after his body was processed at the stadium, where it had been buried in concrete in a wall.
In a wall? I don't understand.
They do that. It's quite common down here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Now it's common. I can't imagine this is a thing that Chile just does.
Yeah.
It's quite common in the last 6 days.
It's also not very structurally sound. You're just going to have a void in there eventually.
I don't think these are load-bearing coffins. That's a bad idea. After the call, he opens the door to interrupt Beth's questioning and immediately begins sobbing. She understands implicitly what's happening, and they hold each other.
We're going home.
They pack Charlie and Beth's life into little boxes and prepare a return to America. Putnam supervises the packing, and Ed demands anything the soldiers took from the house with Charlie to be returned to them. Putnam tries to explain why that won't be possible, and Ed steamrolls over him, insisting he just do what he asked.
And that's not very realistic. And I mean every drawing, every notebook, every article my son wrote or had.
And I can't go to the Chilean.
Do it! Oh, damn it, I don't care whether you think it's a lead pipe cinch or difficult as hell. I want it done.
There are many moments like this in the movie where Ed seems to misunderstand his leverage completely, and I fully expected Putnam to finally just say, Ed, is your wife healthy enough to come here looking for your body? Because if not, pack up your shit and get the fuck out.
Yeah.
They obviously didn't face any consequences for killing Charlie, so why would they face any for killing Ed and Beth right now? Putnam and their driver see them off at the airport and take one last cruel swipe at this grieving wife and father by demanding the shipping cost of Charlie's coffin up front.
Capitalism alive and well in Chile.
I was half expecting them to charge like $18,000 and be like, well, it's really heavy concrete. It's like, you didn't even break it out of it?
Wall.
Jesus. Almost $1,000, and Ed stares daggers into the men before agreeing to pay the fee. Before boarding the plane, Ed makes clear his intention to sue everyone involved in this debacle. Putnam, Tower, the ambassador, anyone involved with approving Charlie's execution and the subsequent cover-up.
I just thank God that we live in a country where we can still put people like you in jail.
No, you can't.
Been like, well, first of all, you don't, and second of all, I'm not in your country, so good luck. Ed and Beth walk to their plane, and we jump forward to a coffin being unloaded in America. Ed's voice reads an epilogue. Ed Horman filed suit charging 11 government officials, including Henry Kissinger, with complicity and negligence in the death of his son. The body was not returned home until 7 months later, making an accurate autopsy impossible. After years of litigation, the information necessary to prove or disprove complicity remains classified as secrets of state. The suit was dismissed. We fade to black and credits roll, which include a disclaimer that the U.S. State Department denies any involvement in the death of Charles Horman. Updates since the film's release. Decades later, a DNA test performed on the remains proved that the body shipped to the Hormans at a cost of $1,000 was not even Charlie's.
Oh, what?
In 1999, a declassified State Department memo implicated the CIA in approving or worse, carrying out Charlie's execution. The full details of the case have yet to be declassified. That's missing, everybody. It's a bummer.
Yeah, it's a very bleak movie. Well made and well performed, but...
And I feel like, especially at an 82, that this could have been very eye-opening for people.
Oh, very biting to the strong right.
And I applaud a major studio for committing to this story so wholeheartedly. I'm surprised, especially during the Reagan administration, that a major studio would be like, oh, by the way, America does terrible things all over the world.
Yeah.
Did you know that? Because that's important to know if you want to be worldly.
Well, I mean, it's a thumbs up from me.
Yeah, definitely a thumbs up.
I thought it was very well. It was tense.
I think Jack Lemmon's performance and Sissy's in places, but I think Jack Lemmon, because he has so much of an arc.
Yeah.
And because it's really heartbreaking when he's finally like trying to apologize for what he's been the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, I think I give it a thumbs up, but it's not like I'm going to tell anybody to go out and watch this movie.
No, for sure. Yeah.
It opened up, not to say it opened up my eyes, but it caused me to read all about the Chilean
the coup and everything.
Yeah. Because like I had heard the name like Pinochet in passing and like history books and things like that, but never really knew like the full grasp. And so that the movie caused me to go out and look things up about it and see what was going on.
Do you guys recall the last character that we had on the podcast in one of our films that was directly involved in the coup that installed Pinochet? He was one of the mercenaries in Chile.
I don't know, somebody from Green Ice.
No, it was further back than that.
Was it that terrible movie about the guy whose best friend was a dictator in South America?
No, not that one. That's more of a thematically linked situation.
Okay.
This was George C. Scott blatantly talking about working in Chile to help depose Allende and install Pinochet.
The Changeling? Don't remember that subplot. The Formula?
The Formula.
What other George C. Scott movies? I was racking my brain.
That was part of his character's background in that.
His frog is half dead.
Such a great movie. But yeah, I really liked Missing. I liked the turn for Lemmon's character. I felt like he really did a great job with the performance. I also liked that sort of behind the scenes that people were obviously really upset about this. It was like a national conversation that this movie was coming out and it was saying these terrible things about America, and that Lemmon was like excited about it. That he was like, I love that people are so upset. I love that this set so many people off. But yeah, there's not a lot else to say about it.
Yeah, I mean,
Terry doesn't get much to do. John Shea, I don't think is great, but he's also not in it for very long.
Exactly.
What are we thinking Letterboxd? Jessica?
I mean, I feel like it's kind of a middle of the road movie because, like we said, it's well made, but I'm not gonna ever watch it again. So I have it kind of in the middle of the road here. I have it at number 23 out of 38. It is below Quest for Fire and above I'm Dancing as Fast as I Can.
I have it in number 9, which puts it below Barbarossa but above Swamp Thing.
I have it in 16. It's just under Evil Speak and just above A Stranger is Watching. Our writer-director here was Costa-Gavras. Before this, he wrote and directed Shock Troops, Z, and Womanlight. The other writer here was Donald E. Stewart. Before this, he wrote Death Sport. And after this, he wrote Jack Ryan films The Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, and Clear and Present Danger. The novelist was Thomas Hauser, who also wrote a novel adapted into the TV movie Chernobyl, The Final Warning. Uncredited writing here from John Nichols, who also wrote novels adapted into The Sterile Cuckoo, The Milagro Beanfield War, and The Wizard of Loneliness. The music here was from Vangelis. We heard his work last year in Chariots of Fire, and later this season he scores Blade Runner, and later still Oliver Stone's Alexander. The cinematographer here was Ricardo Aronovich. We saw his work last lighting Christmas Evil. The editor here was Francois Bonneau. Before this, she edited The Tenant, and later she cuts Top Secret, Year of the Dragon, The Sicilian, Titus, Frida, and Across the Universe. Jack Lemmon played Ed Horman. Before this, he was in Mr. Roberts, Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, Irma la Douce, The Odd Couple, and we've seen him now in The Out of Towners, Airport 77, Tribute, and Buddy Buddy. Later, he's in JFK, The Player, Glengarry Glen Ross, Grumpy and Grumpier Old Men, My Fellow Americans, Hamlet, and The Odd Couple 2, among many others. Sissy Spacek played Beth Horman. Before this, she was in Prime Cut, Badlands, and Carrie. We've seen her now in Three Women, Coal Miner's Daughter, Heartbeat, and Raggedy Man. Later, she's in The Man with Two Brains, JFK with Lemmon, The Grass Harp, also with Lemmon, Blast from the Past, In the Bedroom, Tuck Everlasting, and Hot Rod, among many others. Melanie Mayron played Terry Simon. Before this, she's in Harry and Tonto, and current Patreon poll contender, The Gambler. We've seen her now as Susan in Heartbeeps, and later she's in My Blue Heaven, Clock Stoppers, and episodes of Pretty Little Liars, Jane the Virgin, and Julia. She also has a prolific directing career, starting with 30-something, and later Nash Bridges, The Larry Sanders Show, Dawson's Creek, Arliss, the 90210 reboot, the Mean Girls 2 TV movie, Chasing Life, created by our friend Susanna Fogel, Pretty Little Liars, Charmed, Jane the Virgin, Lincoln Rhyme Hunt for the Bone Collector, created by our friend VJ Boyd, and most recently, The Serpent Queen. John Shea played Charles Horman. He started his career starring in Yentl on Broadway. We mentioned him last for having auditioned for the role of Indiana Jones. Later, he's in Free Jack, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, and he was Lex Luthor in 25 episodes of Lois and Clark. He was Adam Kane in 50 episodes of something called Mutant X, and he also shows up on Law & Order. He's the dad on Gossip Girl. He's in The Good Wife, Agent X, and more recently Blacklist and Blue Bloods. Charles Cioffi played Captain Ray Tower. Before this, he was in Clute. We've seen him now in Shaft and The Other Side of Midnight. Later, he's in Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins. He was Chief Morris in a handful of Kojak TV movies. He was in 32 Days of Our Lives, 9 All My Children's, and he was Section Chief Scott Blevins in 6 episodes of The X-Files. David Clennon played Consul Phil Putnam. We've seen him now in The Paper Chase and Hide in Plain Sight. Later this season, he's back as Palmer in The Thing, and next season in Star 80 and The Right Stuff. Later, he has a lot of TV appearances in 30-something, News Radio, Star Trek Voyager as Dr. Krell Moset in Season 5, Episode 8, Nothing Human. He had a recurring role on Ghost Whisperer, House of Cards, and more recently on a show called Code Black. Richard Venture played the U.S. Ambassador. He appeared previously in All the President's Men. We've seen him now in Airport 77 and Looker. Later, he's in Heartbreak Ridge, The Sicilian, Navy SEALs. He's in A Briscoe County Jr. and 5 Law and Orders. Jerry Hardin played Colonel Sean Patrick. We've seen him so far in Sleeper, Honky Tonk Freeway, and Reds. He's back later in The Falcon and the Snowman, Big Trouble in Little China, The Milagro Beanfield War, Cujo. He's appeared on Star Trek TNG and Voyager. He's in Lois and Clark. He was on Melrose Place, Murder, She Wrote, Dr. Quinn, but he's probably best known for his 11 appearances as Deep Throat on The X-Files. Richard Bradford played Andrew Babcock. Before this, he was in The Missouri Breaks, Going South, and More American Graffiti. He's back later this season for Hammett, and later in The Untouchables, The Legend of Billie Jean, The Milagro Beanfield War, Dr. Giggles, and The Crossing Guard. Joe Regalbuto played Frank Teruggi. Before this, he was in The Goodbye Girl and Cheaper to Keep Her, which we'll eventually get to with a minisode. We've seen him now in Schizoid for the show. He's back this season as Darius in The Sword and the Sorcerer, and later in The Star Chamber, Lassiter, The Sicilian, but I know him best for his 258-episode run as Frank Fontana on Murphy Brown. Keith Szarabajka played David Holloway. We saw him last as Josh in Simon, and later Law & Order, Angel, 24, Cold Case, Sons of Anarchy, and Supernatural, on which he played God. He also has a lot of voice acting credits on shows like Extreme Ghostbusters, Real Monsters, The Angry Beavers, Grim Fandango video game. He was Bowsley and the Unicycle Man in that. He's in Batman Beyond, a couple episodes of Archer as Crenshaw, who gets literally the first line of the entire series because he's torturing Archer for information, and it turns out to be an exercise at the beginning. He also does voices for Transformers series and games, lots of Spider-Man games, most Fallouts, Call of Duty. He voices Victor Fries on Young Justice, Krang in TMNT Out of the Shadows. He's assorted voices on Star Wars Rebels, lots of Halo stuff, and he's Gilgamesh in several Final Fantasy releases. John Doolittle played Dave McGeary. This was his first feature credit. Later he shows up in Oh God, You Devil, Clan of the Cave Bear, and RoboCop 2. Janice Rule played Kate Newman. We saw her last also with Sissy in Robert Altman's 3 Women, but she doesn't have many credits after this, but she's one of the 3 women.
Mm-hmm.
She also appeared with Jack Lemmon in Richard Quine's Bell, Book, and Candle in 1958. Ward Costello played Congressman. Before this, he was General Marshal in MacArthur. We've seen him now in Bloody Birthday and Whose Life Is It Anyway? And later this season, he's back for Firefox. Hansford Rowe played Senator. We've seen him now in 3 Days of the Condor and Simon. Later, he's in The Osterman Weekend, Baby Boom, Bonfire of the Vanities, and more recently, he was Phyllis's father, Elbert, on The Office. Tina Romero played Maria. Before this, she was Alucarda and Alucarda's mother in the film Alucarda. Richard Whiting played Statesman. We've seen him now in Ordinary People, and he's back this season with Tootsie and Love Child. Later, he's in Zelig, 6 Degrees of Separation, and The Hudsucker Proxy. Martin LaSalle played Paris. He previously appeared as Brother Felipe in Alucarda with Tina Romero. He's also in The Bees, and we've seen him before in The Dogs of War. He's back this season for Sorceress. Terrence Nelson played Colonel Clay. This was his only acting credit. He has mostly production managing credits on films like Island of the Blue Dolphins, The Illustrated Man, and Some Kind of Nut. So far on the show, he's worked on They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, Xanadu, Melvin and Howard, and Raggedy Man. Robert Hitt played Peter Charnan. Before this, he was in All That Jazz, and so far on the show, The Four Seasons, Tattoo, and Ragtime. He's back this season for Death Wish lookalike Fighting Back. Jorge Russick played Espinoza. He has credits in The Wild Bunch, Big Jake, and Convoy before this. We've seen him now in Cabo Blanco and Zorro the Gay Blade. Later, he's in License to Kill. Linda Spheris played Woman, State Department. As the name would suggest, she is the sister of Wayne's World, Beverly Hillbillies, Little Rascals, and Black Sheep director Penelope Spheris. This is Linda's only acting credit, but she has done set decks so far for the show on Used Cars, All Night Long, and Continental Divide. She has credits later this season in Halloween 3 and next season's Last Starfighter. Later still, she has set deck credits for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, Point Break, The Little Rascals, Empire Records, Black Sheep, The Rage, Carrie 2, Jeepers Creepers 2, and the TV series Party Down, Dexter, Jane the Virgin, and Gilmore Girls. Jorge Mencia played Captain Airport. This was his only acting credit. He has additional crew credits on Falcon and the Snowman and Total Recall. Mario Valdez played Officer Laundry. We've seen him now in The Octagon and High Risk. Joe I. Tompkins played Marine Officer. This is his only acting credit. He has costume design credits so far for the show on Coal Miner's Daughter, Cheech and Chong's next movie, Foolin' Around, Raggedy Man, and True Confessions. Later he works on Irreconcilable Differences, Howard the Duck, Harlem Nights, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, Fire in the Sky, and Species.
It's interesting that a lot of these first-time acting crew people are all in Sissy Spacek movies.
Yeah. Jacqueline Evans played Woman Ford Foundation. We've seen her now in Guyana Cult of the Damned, and she's back next season in Triumphs of a Man Called Horse, and later Volunteers. I think that's everything for Missing. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, you can find all our socials at linktree/vintagevideopod. If you enjoy what we're doing, consider giving us a review on iTunes. I don't believe it helps visibility, but it's good for morale. And if you really like the show, maybe you could join our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/vintagevideopodcast for access to all our monthly 70s reviews and a hand in choosing next month's film. Patrons are currently choosing between Airport 1975, Benji, Female Trouble, The Gambler, Gold, The House on Skull Mountain, Law and Disorder, The Odessa File, The Taking of Pelham 123, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre for a 50th anniversary review next month. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time when we'll be discussing Parasite, which IMDb describes like so. In a post-apocalyptic USA, a doctor/scientist infected with a new strain of parasite ends up in a small desert town trying to find a cure. We leave you now with the trailer for Parasite.
3D. The movie fantasy of yesterday is now the terrifying film experience of the future. For technical reasons, the preview you are about to see is not three-dimensional. Be assured, Parasite is the most gripping and frightening movie you will ever see. And in 3D, you will be part of the terror. You are about to witness the future. Be warned. It is a shocking sight. 3D, the ultimate sensation of visual art, now creates the newest, most terrifying form of fear, Parasite.
That thing on your stomach.
A new strain of parasite. When it reproduces, it will cast millions of microscopic spores into the air.
Just move your legs towards me real slow. Real slow.
Experience the living, breathing, terrifying vision of modern 3D. Parasite. You have only seen the preview. In 3D, you will live the film. Parasite. The first futuristic monster movie in 3D. Parasite.